Alrighty, in this video we're going to go ahead and start to wrap up our configuration store implementation. So what I want to go ahead and do is I don't want to worry about files. I don't want to worry about having to make a merge JSON object from file method. I think that would be rather silly because really what you can do is you can just use the file static class to read all text from a file directly and do all that fun stuff. So I don't think it's really the responsibility of the configuration store to have any real concept of what a file is. However, I do want it to be able to return the merged JSON as a string. And what I mean by that is we want to be able to merge JSON objects into our configuration store and get everything all, working the way that we want it to. And then we want to be able to write it out into a string so that we can print it to a file for our releases, our release builds. Remember, in the debug builds, we're going to just be merging JSON objects directly, a base and a debug, from within our client Unity project. But when we actually do a build, I want to create a build step that'll actually perform the merging operation and then dump the text file directly into the build, the Unity build itself. Alternatively, we could think about maybe having some configuration options be modifiable from outside of the Unity project itself, as in when a person starts the application, they can change user settings. But I think user settings are fundamentally a different concept than configuration. Configuration is all about, things like what servers to connect to and maybe some API keys and implementation details, more or less. So, and quite possibly we'll also be using the configuration store at some point in the future to replace what we've done with the web.config and app.config transforms. But either way, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and write a test. And what this test is going to do is it's going to merge some JSON objects, and then it's going to it's going to tell the configuration store to turn it into a string. Then we're going to reload that string as JSON and make sure that we're getting the proper data returned back. So, should be a pretty straightforward test. Public void, we're going to do can print out rendered JSON configuration. I am terrible with naming things. We'll start with configuration store equals new configuration store. My keyboard is being kind of annoying right there. Then we're going to do configuration store. We're going to merge in a JSON object. Let's do obj1 has a value 1 of 1, 2, 3 and a value 2 of hey there. And then we're also going to go ahead and merge in an object, and then we're going to override value 2, setting it to whoa. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to render out that as a JSON string. So I'm going to say var rendered JSON string equals configuration store. And at this point, we need to choose a method name for rendering out the JSON string. I mean, we could do maybe .toJSON, something like that. We could do stringify. We can do render JSON. We can, I think just toJSON. toJSON object, so it matches the same verbiage that we used with merge JSON object. Okay, so we'll have a toJSON object. We'll do toJSON object string, I think is going to be what I'll name this. Now what we need to do is we need to load back in the render JSON string and then parse it. Now I could certainly do something like render JSON string .should.be and then pass in, what I want it to be right here. But I don't want to do that because I don't want to actually define the exact format that the JSON string should be in, as long as it's valid JSON. And we can prove it's valid JSON by simply saying, we can say var rendered JSON object equals JSON convert. Now this will bring in newtonsoft.json as a using at the top of the file. And we'll do deserialize object as JObject, passing in rendered JSON string. And then I can now do my assertions based off the rendered JSON object. So I can say rendered JSON object at obj at value value dot value int should be 1, 2, 3, and then render JSON object obj value 2 dot value string should be whoa, because that's the thing that we overloaded. Of course, this is rendered JSON object, not rendered JSON string. Okay, so that's our test. Like I said, all it does is it performs some merging. It then turns it into a JSON string. Then it reparses that rendered JSON string, and that's important. Again, this makes it possible to not have to worry about the exact format that the configuration store is going to return it, as long as it returns valid JSON. So now what we can do is we can hop into the actual configuration store class, and we can take a look at implementing this. And this is fortunately going to be very easy. I believe it's going to be very easy. So what I'm going to do up here is right after the constructor, I'm going to say public string to JSON object string. And I'm thinking that this should only be one line of code. It should just be return JSON convert dot serialize object root object. That should be the most simple form that that we're going to work with there. And that should work out just fine, I think. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this test and see what happens. And we should get a success, and we do, making sure that the test itself is fixed or appropriate. I'm going to change that assertion right there to 124. Now it should fail. I always get suspicious of tests if they work the first time. I probably should have reran the test after stubbing out the method and the code being able to be compiled. Anyway, we run all of our tests, and we see that our configuration store is working. Now, there's a handful of improvements that we could make to the configuration store. One of them is hiding the concept of a JToken publicly and hiding it behind an interface. We could do that, and the benefit of that would be it would then be impossible to modify the data within a configuration store when we acquire the data through its indexer, and that's actually a good thing to do. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but I think that a better design would be to write an interface and a class wrapper around the JToken that only exposes the read-only aspects of a JToken. But for now, I think we're just going to leave it as it is in the interest of time. So at this point, we're pretty much ready to start using our configuration store. So what I'm going to do is let's go into our client Unity project. And we have all this code here. I'm not a big fan of all this code just kind of chilling out here in the root of the project. If you recall, they're all actually just links to our Buzz MMO client project. To clean it up, we could simply introduce our infrastructure and systems folders inside of the client Unity and move all the things into it. Otherwise, another solution could be to create a new folder and say linked, and just dump all of these linked files into that linked folder. Now, that doesn't actually make a difference on the file system, although there is now a physical folder called linked on the file system. But what it does do is it makes it so we can easily collapse all of the linked code that we have so that we get some more readability, or a little bit of a cleaner project structure here. So what I want to do is I do want to introduce 3 configuration files. I want to introduce a base config, a debug config, and a production config. And at this point, I will be committing them all into source control, but it's not necessarily required for me to do so. In fact, it'd be better if I didn't, particularly the development config. But I don't know. I think I'm just going to go ahead and create a new folder here called config, and we will be dumping all of our things into source control for this particular application. If your development team were to grow in size, what you would do is you might still want to commit your production configuration, but you would no longer want to commit your developer specific configuration. And what you would do is you would add it to your git ignore. Anyway, underneath the config folder, I'm going to create a new item, 3 new items actually. And I'm just going to come up here to code file, which is just an empty template. Now it says a blank C# code file, but if we replace the extension, it won't matter. And what I'm going to do is do base.json and hit add. Now we have a base.json file. And then just as a shortcut, I'm going to hit Control C and then Control V twice to create 2 copies of base.json. And then I'm going to rename them. I'm going to rename one development, and I'm going to rename the other production. Now, I do want to open up all of these and just preemptively make them JSON objects so I don't forget. Because remember, the configuration store will throw an error if we don't pass it in a JSON object. So we have our base, development, and production. Now, the base JSON, what I want to use this for is kind of just to define all of our shared configuration that won't change between development and production, as well as placeholders for all of our configuration values that we might want. So as far as configuration values we might want, what we want to do here is open up our client C#, which is the Visual Studio solution for the Unity project. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to wait 2.5 million years. There we go. What I'm going to do here is the first thing that we're going to want to change, or at least use our configuration store for, is this value right here, these 2 values. So what I'm going to do is over here in our base.json, I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. And what configuration option name should we use for the IP address of the server? We could do... Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an object. I'm going to say master server : and it's going to be a new object, right? And then, oh, there we go. I think that should be fine. And it's going to have a address, and it's also going to have a application name. And those are the 2 values. And I'm just going to put placeholders in here. I'm going to say placeholder and placeholder. So now we have our first bit of configuration here, our address and application name of our master server. So now let's go ahead and override them for our development and our production JSON files. So in development, I'm going to say master server, and his address is going to be my development server, which, while I'm doing this, I forgot to actually start the virtual machine for this. So while we're doing this, I'm going to have the virtual machine boot up. Give it a quick second. Well, I can go ahead and type this out. Oh, no, and we're back. Move over. And resume. Okay, so the address of our development server is going to be our 127.0.0.1 for localhost, and then 5055 for the port. And then the application name is going to be buzzmmo.server.master. So that's our development master server. Now for our production master server, we're going to have a address of 192.168. This is my own virtual machine, so obviously this won't work for you guys. 128.5055, and then our application name is going to be buzzmmo.server.master. So now we have our production, we have our development, and we have our base. All right, so that's all well and good, but how do we go ahead and get this merged in during runtime for our client Unity? So how would we in development mode get this information? So let's bring over our Unity solution and start working on this. So we have our infrastructure, and we have our systems. Let's see here. So we have our game context, and our game context is kind of like the master of everything, sort of, and handles, it's sort of like the aggregate root of this whole system. So let's go ahead and make a configuration store per game context. And then we're going to also have to figure out how we would load a production versus development configuration. So what I'm going to do here is on the game context, I'm going to say public, or first of all, I'm going to go back to BuzzMMO. I'm going to hit F6. Now this is important because what this will do is it'll build out our base project with our new configuration store class, and it'll dump the DLLs inside of our Unity project, so now we can access them. So I'm going to say public configuration store configuration. And the first thing I want to do here, even before we configure log4net, so on our awake method, the first thing I want to do is establish our configuration. And there's going to be two instances. Either we load a single file because we're in production, or we load multiple files because we are in the Unity editor itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off just assuming we're always in the Unity editor. And then when we write our build step, we'll work on writing the production version of this. So I'm going to say configuration store equals new, or sorry, configuration equals new configuration store. Then I'm going to say configuration.merge JSON object file, which is going to import system.io at the top of the file, .read all text, and then I'm going to pass in a relative path to our other project. So I think it's going to be back1, back2. Well, let's figure this out here. Well, actually, a better way to do this would be to use application.datapath, but I forgot where datapath points to, actually. Let me go ahead and Google that real fast. Unity application datapath. Okay, application datapath is going to point to the assets folder. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to say application.datapath plus back. Now the first back is going to take us out of assets. Then we'll do another back, which will take us out of client. Another back, which will take us out of Unity. Then a source. Then our buzz MMO dot client dot unity /config /base.json, because it goes client unity config base.json. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this line, and I'm going to change the second one to point to development.json. All right. Actually, I'm thinking here. No, that's fine. Okay, so merge JSON object, then we'll read all those. Okay, so that should be good. Now let's go down to start. So we're no longer going to have this conditional compilation here. We're just going to do transport.connect, and we're going to connect to configuration at master server at address dot value string. So that's going to be our address, and then our application name. Oh, it doesn't like that. It needs a reference to JSON. That's actually fine. Don't worry about this error. This error will go away once we launch Unity. I'll explain why when that happens, but just don't worry about that error. Then we'll do configuration master server at application name dot value string. One interesting thing we could do is we could actually make a class called master server configuration, and we can have the J object itself sort of deserialize itself into an object of that type. That'd be kind of cool, but at this point I'm not really too concerned about that. I think this will be good enough for what we want. Okay, so our next goal here is to make sure this works. So I'm going to go ahead and start up my Photon. Move that down here. Default start as application. Then I'm going to fire up Unity. Okay, so the reason we're getting this error right here is because it needs a reference to JSON.net. But we never got a reference to JSON.net until we opened up Unity. And the reason for that is because when we added a reference to JSON.net in Buzz MMO base, right, Newtonsoft JSON, whenever we build this, it gets copied to its build location, right? So that means it's going to get copied into the Unity project, into the assets folder. So we have our assemblies. It was copied when we did our build, but since Unity never saw it getting copied, it never updated the actual CS proj of the client project to include that reference. Because remember, what Unity is going to do is it's going to add a reference to every single DLL that we have, but we never gave it the opportunity. What's going on here? A value string gets the J token with a specified key converted to the specified type. The token key. What is this? Oh, don't tell me that's a new method that was just introduced in a more recent version that doesn't work in .NET 3.5. That would be really just awful. I guess it is. Okay, so we can't use value. I wonder if we can use toObject. Yeah. Okay. So we're not using value, we're using toObject instead. Creates the specified type from the thing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so hopefully this works. Well, we'll find out soon enough. Okay, so just remember to change the value to toObject. Okay, so now that we have no more compilation errors, let's go ahead and load up our loader scene. And let's hit play and see what happens. Okay, so it can't find projects, 3D Buzz, MMO class, Buzz MMO, Unity, source. Okay, it looks like I just didn't back up enough. So let's add one more backup here. So we back up a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Now let's hit play. And we connected. And we obviously connected to the right server, because otherwise we would have gotten that. We can test that ourselves very easily by coming back into our client Unity, going into our config, going into development, and changing this address to something invalid. Coming back into Unity and hitting play. And we see that we weren't able to connect. Meaning it is, not only is it reading these files, but it's correctly merging them, which is exactly what we want. Alright, so what about builds? So when a build happens, what I need to do is I need to have a build step that'll actually perform the merging and then dump the results of that merging into a known file location inside of Unity. So let's go ahead and define what the file that we want to have here. I'm just going to go ahead and just say, let's just do a, well, we're going to have to do a resources folder. So let's go ahead and create a new folder, and I'm going to call this resources. And then under resources, I'm going to, actually, I'm just going to leave it like that. And then what I'm going to have happen is I'm going to have the config.json file printed out into this resources folder. So before we write the actual build code for that, well, I guess we could go ahead and just write the build code first. So let's go into our build folder. And let's create a new build task. So I'm going to create a new class, and it's going to be render production, or how about render Unity client configuration. And it's going to have to go ahead and inherit from task, Microsoft build task, and then we're going to have to implement the execute method. So again, we're just adding a new build task here. And what I want to do is I want to actually, hold on. We have env, dev, and prod and start. Dev, prod, and star. Actually, I think what I want to go ahead and do here is change the names of our configuration files. So inside of our client Unity, on our config folder, we have base, development, and production. Let's change this to development to dev and production to prod, so that they line up with the build configurations that we already have sort of established. Of course, by changing development to dev, we do need to go back into our Unity client and change it to loading dev instead of development. Okay, going back into Buzz MMO, now that we have those folder names changed, or the file names changed, what we can do is just like what we did before with like the update build info. It has this env string. So let's bring that over. I'm going to say public string env, which will be passed in from the build script. And when we execute, what I need to do is I first need to create a configuration store. So I'm going to say configuration store equals new configuration store, which of course will import base infrastructure. We first need to merge in our base. So how do we get our base? So I'm going to say configuration store.merge JSON object. And what I need to do is I need to get a path. What's the best way to get a path? Let's see here. What do we pass in? Looks like we use msbuild this file directory. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have public string end, and I'm also have public string client config folder. Okay? So we're going to say configuration store.merge JSON object, and we're going to say we're going to pass in file, which brings in system.io, .read all text, and then we're going to pass in path.combine client config folder, followed by string.format placeholder.json, passing in env. Or, well, that'll work on the first one, or the second one. The first one needs to be the base, which is going to be file.readAllText, path.combine, client config folder, base.json. So this will merge in prod or sta, depending on what build configuration we're running on. Then we need to render this out into a JSON folder, or into a Unity folder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another public string. I'm going to say public string Unity config folder. Then I'm going to say file.writeAllText, passing in path.combine Unity config folder, followed by config.json. And the contents of the file is going to be configuration store.toJSON object string. And then we're going to return true. So far, all pretty straightforward stuff. We just merge the base in with the environment-specific configuration, and then we dump it out into the Unity config folder. Okay, so now we have to update our BuzzMMO build.proj to use this task. So let's go ahead and move them side by side. And I'm going to go full screen for this and figure out what we need to do. The first thing we need to do is we need to import the task. So right here on line 31, we need to import the render Unity client configuration task. So I'm going to say using task name equals buzzmmo.build.tasks.render Unity client configuration, passing in an assembly file of this, which I'm just going to copy and paste this. So you see right there, we have copied and pasted, or we've basically added a new import task, or task import. Now that we've done that, we can come down here to our deploy client. Now, before we build Unity, we have to invoke this task. Okay, so how do we invoke the task? I think we just use this. So up here on, right here on deploy client, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say render Unity client configuration. And we need to pass in the environment first. So we're going to pass in env equals env. Then we're going to pass in client config folder equals msbuild this file directory, followed by, what directory does this file live in, by the way? I think it just lives straight right under source, and it does. So what we can do is we can just say msbuild this file directory /buzzmmo.client.unity/config. And that's our client config folder. Next up, we need to pass in our Unity resources folder. So I'm going to say Unity config folder equals msbuild this file directory /unity/client/assets/resources. So this is going to be where the tool will dump the built configuration file. And that should be that. So what I should be able to do now is I should be able to go ahead and actually perform a build and have this file appear. So let's go ahead and launch our Visual Studio development tools. So I'm going to say Visual Studio, or developer command prompt for Visual Studio 2012. I'm going to change directory into the source directory. Then I'm going to run msbuild buzzmmo build proj /p:/env equals dev. And of course, we're also wanting to do /t build client or deploy client. Okay, we get an error. The error we get is the command Unity build Windows player exit with code 1. Well, that's fine. Did it at least build the configuration file? I want to find that out. Assets. It did build the configuration file, as you can see right there. And if we go ahead and open this guy up, we will see that it has been printed out and it has the proper configuration. Let's do a production build and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And then I'm going to run env equals prod. And I don't care that Unity blows up when it tries to build. I'm not too concerned about that. I mean, I would be interested to know why it's doing that, but it could quite possibly be, I don't know. I can figure that out later. What I really care about is if this configuration JSON file is being updated, and it is. See how when I use prod, I get a different set of configuration values. And most importantly, they're all merged, and they're all in this file, which is in a resources folder, which can be loaded by the Unity client itself. So now that I've done that, all we have to do now is come back into our client, and right here, all we have to do is just write a conditional if statement. So this is going to be if we're in the Unity editor. So I'm going to say if Unity editor, then do this, else do something else, end if. So if we're in the Unity editor, we just do the merging inside of memory, so we don't have to do a rebuild step. If we're not, we load the production configuration. Now, I'm going to go ahead and write this code outside of the end if. The reason I'm doing that is if code gets commented out, or not commented out, if you use the preprocessor to remove code from the file, Visual Studio won't give you IntelliSense or error correcting or anything. So I'm going to write this line of code outside of this, so I can make sure I get IntelliSense and not make a stupid mistake somewhere. I'm going to say configuration.merge JSON object. Then I'm going to say resources.load text asset config.json.text. And that's it. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to dump it in that else if. And now I have configuration. So now we can change our configuration between development in production and staging and other people's development computers without changing the code at all. And I think that's really cool. But let's go ahead and test this, make sure it works. What I'm going to do here is I do want to go ahead and I'm going to add this config file to the gitignore file. So I'm going to back up all the way to my gitignore file. I'm going to open that up. And I'm going to ignore Unity client resources config.json. And then save this out. Now I'm going to open up source tree, we'll do a commit, and we'll do a build. And we'll see what happens. And it'll be super exciting. At least I think it'll be super exciting. Once source tree actually loads. I could really move this out into a different class. I might do that at some point. There are just refactorings that I've been thinking about doing every now, or just, you know, kind of adding up over time that I'll worry about later. For now, we're just going to keep things straightforward. Okay, so we're in Buzz MMO. Let's go ahead and grab everything. Let's make sure that Unity assets, it is there. That's not good. I want you to be ignored. Ignore. Unity client assets resources config JSON. I added that to the gitignore, didn't I? Unity client. Oh, Unity client assets resources config JSON. There we go. Now give it a sec to get its act together here. Come on. You can do it. Okay, it really doesn't want to be ignored. Unity client assets resources config JSON. Unity client assets resources config JSON. So Unity client assets resources config.json. Well, this is getting kind of annoying. Okay, I'm just gonna do this through this. I'm gonna say Unity client assets config JSON, and I'm just gonna hit OK. And what that's going to do is that's going to go ahead and modify my actual gitignore for me, which I should be able to do myself, but apparently I just don't know gitignore syntax that well. Oh, it added this. Ah. Whatever. Point is, source tree is happy now. Let's go ahead and commit all this stuff, and then say configuration manager, and push changes immediately. Okay, it seems that my virtual machine is having some issues here. I'm trying to open up Team City on it, and it seems to not be wanting to open. So I'm going to go ahead and localhost 84. There's no reason why this shouldn't work. It does work. Did my IP address change? Don't tell me I really need to put a static IP. 127.136. What did I have here? Development. No, production. 127.128. Ah. Okay. First of all, I'm going to change this address to use my host name. So I'm going to change it to MMO 3D Buzz Sta, so that I don't have to keep track of that horrible, horrible changing address, which I will at some point get around to making it into a static IP. And then I'm going to go ahead and update my hosts file because the IP changed, and because the IP changed, I need to do that. So it's actually 127 136 now. All right, close that out. Now I should be able to hit Team City. But that doesn't really matter too much because I can also access Team City directly. Oh, there we go. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to commit that change I made to the configuration. Updated. Which, didn't I hardcode that IP address into my build script? That would be really terrible practice if I did. Well, I hardcoded the host name, but that's not that bad. Either way, here's Team City. We pushed that to master. Let's go ahead and test our changes. So what I'm going to do is... also, to prove that we actually got a new version of the client, I'm also going to come in here and change the main camera's back color to some hideous greenish color. And then we're going to make sure to save the scene. Then I'll commit this. And commit that. Okay, jumping back in here, we do need to go ahead and deploy our client, actually, because I think that's the only thing we need to deploy. And again, at some point, we do need to go in and actually make this run our unit tests. All right, while that's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and locate my launcher. I think we should all start using Gradle instead of MS Build. Gradle is a really cool build tool I've been playing with recently. It's a based on a language called Groovy, which is some weird dynamic language that runs on the JVM, which is also pretty neat. From what I've read up on Groovy, it seems like it's Java done right. But you have Gradle, which is this really cool build environment that allows you to write build scripts pretty straightforwardly. I mean, it has a whole lot of features, and it's a whole lot nicer to work with than MS Build. I hate MS Build, honestly. Okay, so we have deployed. Let's go ahead and do our launch. Admin, I think. Downloading latest client, extracting client, and launching. Okay, the first thing I want to see is if the color of the screen changes, and it does. The next thing I want to see is I want to close this out and open up the client's log, its output log, to see if it actually connected. No, we got a null reference exception on game context awake. Wow. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. It must not have gotten the config JSON. That's weird. Let's go ahead and see if it even built the config JSON by opening up our virtual machine and tracking down our working directory for our Team City, which is going to be under Team City, Build Agent, Work, Unity, Client, Assets, Resources. Okay, so config.json did get built, but did it not get added to the build? Oh, that would be weird. Load text asset config JSON. Ooh, actually, I'm remembering something. It needs to end with txt, doesn't it? Yeah, I think it does. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Instead of config.json, we're going to do config.txt. So we're going to change that inside of the Unity editor. And we also need to go into our build task, our render Unity client configuration, and change it from config.json to config.txt. Now that we've done that, I'm going to delete the config.json inside of my own. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to delete config.json from within that. Then I'm also going to update my gitignore to ignore config.txt instead of config.json. Then I'm going to commit the changes of source tree. Oh, come on. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and run the build. I guess I can go ahead and pause the video while this is working. All right, we got a build. Now let's go ahead and open my launcher. And then wait a few seconds, and then close the client, and open up the output log, and we still get object reference not set to an instance of an object. Okay, so this is what we do to debug this issue. You panic. No, let's go ahead and run a production build again. And we get that error. I don't really care about that error. In fact, I think that error is happening is because I still have this loaded. Either way, we now have our config resource file. Now what we do is we test our code by swapping this. So I'm just going to say, if not Unity editor, then do this, otherwise do this. And then let's hit play and see what happens. So object reference not set to an instance of an object on line 36, which I assume it means this bit right here. So it's not loading the text asset config.txt, which, oh, because the file extension. Stupid. Okay, now let's go ahead and turn that around. Okay, yeah, you don't want the file extension. I always forget that with resources. It's like Unity does so much to try to hide complexity from you that they don't even allow you to specify file extensions. It's like, come on, guys, really? Anyway, yeah, that should work. Let's go ahead and launch source tree and commit our changes. Which I really should add these client assembly C# as to be ignored, as well as the slin. Either way, we will fix that later. All right, so we'll commit, and I'll go ahead and pause the video while I run a client deployment. All right, we got a successful build. Let's go ahead and fire up our... Oh, it's not our client. We need to fire up our launcher. All right, let's close out and open up our output log. And it just didn't connect. I'm wondering if I don't have Photon running on my thing. Now, we didn't get any errors. That's good. But it didn't connect either. Okay, Photon Socket server is running. Why wouldn't it have connected? Maybe it doesn't like that host name. Wait a second, are we building in a production or are we building in staging? I forgot which one we're building in. Let's look at our root project, our parameters. We don't have any parameters defined. Let's go here, go to parameters. Env is prod. So we are getting the right configuration value. So let's change this to the IP address of our server here. 192.168.127.136. All right, we'll build that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not only just going to build the client, I'm first going to go ahead and rebuild the servers as well, just in case some changes may have affected that. Now the server builds should not take a whole lot of time. Hopefully those will get... Okay, so it's queued. We got an error. Why did we get an error? What do you want? What do you want from me? Executed with error code. Unhandled exception. Missing method exception. Method not found. What? Okay, so yeah, we got some warnings. That's fine. It looks like we have a... That's weird. Actually, I'm pretty sure what's causing that. I recently installed Visual Studio 2015 on my VM, and that could have very easily have changed the MS deploy version, which I don't want to deal with. So yeah, fun stuff. I'll figure that out on my own. It shouldn't affect any of you guys, though. But it's nothing wrong with the actual code, so don't worry about that. All right. Oh, great. I hate arrow shakes so much. All right, close that out. Open up our output log, and we still get a disconnect. What if we try to connect to that server directly? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this address and I'm going to dump it in our dev address right here. And then I'm going to hit play. And it seems that it just does not want to connect. Status change disconnect. Is there a firewall setting on my virtual machine or something? I don't know. maybe I should try restarting the Photon service. Maybe take a look at the logs. The applications are running. It just really, really doesn't want to connect. Oh! There, it connects. Now let's launch from our launcher again. Yeah, don't ask me. Apparently I just needed to restart my Photon server on my VM. That was it. Either way, yes, I do have a slight problem with my MS Deploy and having Visual Studio 2015 on it. I'll come up with a solution for it and let you guys know, because I'm sure some of you might be wanting to play with VS 2015 as well. But for now, I think that pretty much wraps everything up. I mean, we have a very robust configuration system working right now that works in both development and in production. So now if we ever have any configuration options, we can set them up here and we can do overrides on them as well. So I think that wraps up our configuration stuff, and it's time to move on probably to actually finishing our systems implementation with our RPC callbacks. But we'll see you guys in the next video.